The fire had been out for hours, yet the smell of smoke still clung to everything. The curtains, the armchair, even my skin. I sat in the middle of the living room, staring at the blackened photograph half buried in the ashes. The smiling faces in it were almost gone, melted by the flames. Only one remained, my daughter's. Clara's eyes, frozen in that picture, seemed to mock me even now. It had been 3 days since the fire, 3 days since my world had quietly collapsed. The police said it was an accident. I nodded, smiled politely, and let them leave. But I knew better. Because I was the one who started it. And it all began with a phone call. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that feels heavy with secrets. The sky was grey, the wind slow, and the world felt suspended. I was sitting by the window, watching the leaves drift across the old stone road, when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. But something, a strange chill in my chest, made me pick it up. "Mom," Clara's voice said. Cold. Sharp. Too steady. "Yes, darling." There was a pause. I could hear the sound of a busy street behind her, cars, laughter, the life she'd built far from me. "I just wanted to let you know that I sold the lake house," she said quickly. My heart stopped. "You sold it?" "Yes," she replied, her tone light, almost cheerful. "And the truck too. I needed the money. We're leaving for Paris tomorrow. Andrew got us an investment opportunity. You don't need to worry about anything anymore." Worry. The word stung. "That house was your father's," I said quietly. "He built it with his own hands." "Mom," she sighed, impatient. "It was falling apart. You couldn't even climb the stairs without gasping. You don't need a lake house." Then her voice softened, but not in a way that felt kind. "It's better this way. You'll understand one day. Bye." The line went dead. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. I sat there, still holding the receiver, staring at the faded wallpaper. The tick-tock of the clock filled the room. Slow, cruel, endless. 46 years I had loved her. 46 years of scraped knees, birthday cakes, and sleepless nights. And just like that, she erased it all. But she didn't know. She didn't know what her father left behind, or what I had discovered after his death. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas, my late husband, standing by the old lake house porch, smiling like he used to. "Eleanor," he'd say, "when I'm gone, open the drawer in my study. Only when you truly need to." For years, I had ignored that memory. I thought he meant his will, or some old paperwork. But after that call, his words echoed in my mind like a whisper I could no longer ignore. At dawn, I made myself a cup of coffee, hands trembling slightly. The house was quiet, the air heavy with old grief. I walked into his study, a room I hadn't entered since the funeral. Dust coated every surface, and the faint scent of cedar still lingered in the air. His desk stood by the window, facing the hills. In the second drawer, I found a sealed brown envelope, yellowed by time. On it, in his careful handwriting, were 3 words. "For Eleanor, only when ready." My breath caught. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside, there was a letter, and a small brass key. The letter was short, written in the steady, neat strokes I had loved all my life. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I trust you've found your strength again. I never told you everything, not because I wanted to keep secrets, but because I wanted to protect you. The lake house and the truck aren't the only things we own. 4 years, I invested quietly. In land, in shares, in things you'd never imagine. Everything is in your name now. But there's something else, something you must see for yourself. Go to the cottage by the old mill road. The key will open the door. You'll understand everything once you're there. With all my love, Thomas." My hands shook as I read it again and again. The cottage by the mill road. I hadn't been there in decades. It had belonged to my husband's uncle, long abandoned after his death. But something told me that whatever waited for me there was bigger than money, or betrayal. I tucked the key into my coat pocket and left before the sun was fully up. The path to the mill road was long and muddy, lined with whispering pines. The air smelled of damp earth and old secrets. When I reached the cottage, I hesitated. The windows were boarded, the paint peeling, ivy creeping up the walls. It looked like something forgotten by time. But when I slid the brass key into the lock, it turned easily, as if it had been waiting. The door creaked open. Dust danced in the faint light that spilled through the cracks. The air was cold, heavy. Inside, the cottage looked untouched, frozen in another life. On a small wooden table sat a single object, a metal box, locked. Next to it lay a folded newspaper clipping, dated 12 years ago. I picked it up. Businessman Thomas Grace invests in hidden coastal project. My heart skipped. Hidden coastal project? Thomas was a teacher, not a businessman. I turned the clipping over. A photograph caught my eye. It was of Thomas standing beside a man I recognized immediately. Andrew, my daughter's husband. My breath caught. My mind went blank. Why was Thomas with him? I sat on the dusty floor, clutching the paper, my thoughts spinning. The key from the envelope. I tried it on the metal box. It fit perfectly. Inside were documents, letters, and photographs. Photographs that shattered everything I thought I knew about my husband, my daughter, and myself. The photographs slipped from my trembling hands and scattered across the dusty floor. Each one was a shard of truth, slicing through the illusion I had lived in for years. In one photo, Thomas and Andrew stood beside a gleaming black car, shaking hands outside a small harbor. In another, they were seated at a dinner table, glasses raised in a silent toast. And in a third, a woman stood between them, elegant, sharp-eyed, and unfamiliar. On the back of that photograph, in my husband's handwriting, was a single name, Claudia. I whispered it aloud, and the sound echoed through the empty cottage like a ghost's laugh. Who was she? The letters in the box were worse. I unfolded one, the ink faded but legible. Thomas. We can't risk Eleanor finding out about the account until everything is finalized. Andrew and I will handle Clara. Once the transfer is complete, you'll be free to come with me. See. The world around me blurred. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. It couldn't be true. Not Thomas. Not the man who read me poetry by candlelight, who kissed my hands after gardening, who whispered promises under the stars. I sank into the chair, clutching the letter. My chest felt hollow, as though something vital had been carved out. For a long time, I sat there, frozen between disbelief and rage. Then, slowly, my thoughts began to clear, and I started piecing things together. Claudia. The mysterious, coastal project. Andrew's sudden rise in wealth. The way Clara had become distant, almost cold, after marrying him. It all made sense now. Horribly, perfectly. Thomas hadn't just betrayed me before he died. He had trusted them, my daughter and her husband, to continue something he'd started in secret. The lake house, the truck, the investments, everything I thought we built together, had been part of a game I never even knew existed. I wanted to scream. But instead I laughed. A hollow, broken laugh that didn't sound like me at all. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weak. I felt awake. I spent hours in that cottage, reading every paper, studying every account number, every signature. By nightfall, I had filled an old notebook with details, proof of everything they'd hidden. But among all that deceit, one letter stood out, unsigned, written in Thomas's handwriting but never sent. Eleanor. I wanted to tell you everything, but I feared losing you. What began as business became something else, something darker. Claudia wasn't who she said she was. She wanted control, and Andrew helped her take it. I tried to stop them, but it was too late. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll protect Clara. She doesn't know the truth. She thinks she's helping me. Please, forgive me. T. My breath caught. Protect Clara? The pages trembled in my hand. If Thomas had written this before he died, that meant Clara had been manipulated, or worse, used. Suddenly, the picture of her selling the lake house seemed different. Maybe she truly believed she was doing what was right. Maybe Andrew was the real puppeteer all along. But if that was true, why had she cut me off so coldly? Something inside me whispered that I was missing a piece. One final piece. I left the cottage with the box of evidence and drove home under the heavy black sky. The air smelled like rain and secrets. When I reached my house, I lit only one lamp and spread the papers across the dining table. Thomas, Andrew, Claudia, Clara. 4 names. 4 corners of the same trap. The more I read, the clearer it became. Andrew had found out about Thomas's investments before Thomas died. He and Claudia had convinced Clara to transfer ownership under the guise of helping the family. But there was something else hidden in the documents, a pattern of transactions from an unknown account. Each one labeled simply, E.g., E.g. I stared at the letters for minutes, thinking. Then it hit me, Eleanor Grace. My name. The account was mine. And the last transaction had been made 2 months ago. By Andrew. A chill ran through me. He'd been moving money from my name, my identity, into offshore accounts. Everything I owned had been slipping quietly away. And Clara, she had no idea. Or did she? That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the house like a ghost, passing old photographs of birthdays, vacations, the day Clara graduated. Her smile was different back then. Softer, warmer. Before Andrew. By morning, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront her with anger. Not yet. I needed to see the truth in her eyes first. So I called her. Mom, she answered, voice tight. Clara, I found something of your father's. Letters. About the lake house. Silence. Then carefully she said, what kind of letters? The kind that explain everything, I said. I think we need to talk. She hesitated, then sighed. Fine. I'll come tomorrow. But Mom, please, don't do anything rash. Her words made my stomach twist. It wasn't worry. It was warning. When she arrived the next evening, she looked exhausted. Designer coat, dark circles under her eyes, hands clutching her purse too tightly. Where's Andrew? I asked casually. In the car. He's taking a call, she replied, glancing toward the window. I nodded, pretending not to notice how she avoided my gaze. I led her into the living room, where the letters were laid out on the table. Her eyes widened as she recognized Thomas's handwriting. Mom, where did you get these? She whispered. From the cottage on Mill Road. He left them for me. Her face paled. Clara, I said gently, tell me the truth. Did you know about this? About the accounts, Claudia, the investments? Her lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, tears filled her eyes. I didn't know, she whispered finally. Not until it was too late. Andrew told me Dad had debts. He said we needed to sell everything before the bank took it. I believed him. I felt my heart twist. Part pain, part pity. And now? I asked. Now, she looked down. I don't know who he really is anymore. A car horn honked outside. Short, impatient. That's him, she said, wiping her eyes. I have to go. Wait, I said quickly. There's something you need to see first. I handed her the last photograph, the one with Thomas, Andrew, and Claudia together. Her hands trembled as she stared at it. He lied to both of us, I said softly. But he didn't destroy us yet. She looked up at me, her face a storm of regret and fear. What are you going to do, Mom? I smiled, the kind of smile that hides 1,000 unspoken things. I'm going to finish what your father started, I said. But this time, no one will see it coming. Outside, Andrew's car engine roared to life. Clara turned to leave, but I stopped her at the door. "Clara," I whispered, "if you ever feel unsafe, come home." She nodded weakly and walked out. Through the window, I watched her climb into the car. Andrew leaned toward her, his mouth moving fast, his expression dark. Then they drove away. As the taillights disappeared into the fog, I turned back to the table and looked at the photograph once more. Thomas had built a web. Andrew had stolen it. Claudia had poisoned it. But I was going to burn it all down. Not out of revenge. Out of justice. And maybe, just maybe, redemption. There's an advantage to being invisible. People speak to you as if you're part of the furniture. They hand you their pity like a blanket and never bother to see the person under it. For the first time in my life, I decided to make that invisibility work for me. The next morning I dressed carefully, not to impress anyone, but to make sure I didn't look fragile. A battered grey coat, sensible shoes, the hair pinned back in the way Thomas liked. Appearances are a language, and I wanted to speak the right dialect. Harmless, unthreatening, and entirely underestimated. Mr. Peterson, my lawyer, met me with that mix of professional warmth and private concern. He had been at the funeral and had visited twice since. He kept asking if I was eating, sleeping. Small things people say when they don't know what else to say. I told him I was fine. He believed me. He had to. If he hadn't, he'd never agree to what I asked next. "Everything in those documents is legitimate?" I asked, watching his face. He sighed, folding the papers again as if they had a life of their own. "Yes. Your late husband was meticulous. Accounts spread across local trusts, a small holding company, land leases. He used a shell company for discretion. Most of it is in your name. Legally, unquestionably yours. But the transfers Andrew made are problematic. He leveraged some of the properties as collateral for loans. If the banks call them in, he could be in trouble. That's the lever." "Then pull it," I said, the words precise as a scalpel. Not loud. Cleanly. Quietly. Peterson's eyes narrowed. "You want me to start legal processes?" "No," I corrected him. "You'll do what you must on paper, yes. But I want a strategy. I want a way to stop Andrew without the whole town knowing there was money to steal in the first place. If word gets out too soon, they'll scatter like roaches." He studied me for a long time. "You're not the same woman you were, Mrs. Grace." There was admiration in that, an unspoken acknowledgement that something had shifted. "I'm tired of being kind," I said. "I'm tired of being polite while people pick my bones. Help me corner him. Make him think he's winning, until he has nowhere left to stand." We put a plan together, not of revenge, but of restoration. Paperwork to freeze accounts, discreet notices to banks, a carefully worded letter to the buyers who thought they'd legally purchased the lake house. The law, my newfound ally, can move like a slow river, patient and inevitable. But I also needed something the law could not provide: exposure. Andrew was a man of habits. He celebrated loudly where it suited him and took his petty cruelties in private. He was easy to bait if you knew how to dangle the right thing. I had photographs that showed him cozying up to Thomas, letters that showed him colluding with Claudia. I had a thread connecting every lie. What I needed now was to tug that thread in a way that would make it unravel in public without making me look like a scorned, vindictive mother. My first move was smaller than a whisper. I wrote a letter, carefully worded, vague enough to look like concern, addressed to the financial controller of the small bank where some of the shell accounts had lived. I signed it as an anonymous tip. To whom it may concern. There are discrepancies in accounts linked to the Grace holdings. Please review transfers dated within the last 6 months. It would be a shame if a bank audit revealed improper collateralization of properties. A friend of the town. I mailed it from a postbox 3 towns over and watched, from my kitchen window, as the postman strode away oblivious. It was petty. It was perfect. It started ripples. While the bankmen shuffled papers and coughed privately into their coffee cups, I shifted to another front. I went to the diner where Andrew liked to have Sunday breakfasts. He was there, as predictable as the sunrise. New shoes, expensive watch, an air that said he had nothing to hide. He met me with a look that measured me and set me aside like a nuisance. "Eleanor," he said blandly, "you need to rest." "No, Andrew." I sat. "I came because I want to understand. Why did you lie to my daughter? Why did you sell what you promised to protect?" He laughed, low and sharp. "You think you know everything because you found some papers in an old box? I know enough to know you aren't the man she married." My eyes were steady. "You used her. You used him. And you used me. I don't want to ruin you, yet. I want you to come clean." His face closed like a door. "You should mind your health, Eleanor." I left him with that. He would not see my next move coming. He never did. He never saw the quiet things. I also began to weave small kindnesses into the town. Nothing self-congratulatory, nothing ostentatious. I repaired Mr. Holloway's fence with my own hands when he was hospitalized. I baked bread for Mrs. Kane, who stooped back always gave her away as proud and alone. The neighbors took these acts as evidence of my fragile noble widowhood. It was delicious to be underestimated. People confided in me, forgetting I could listen like a net, catching every bit of gossip Andrew and Clara left behind. The web they had spread was wide. The town's murmurs put threads around their ankles. It was during one of those afternoons, on the trough of late summer, that something unexpected happened. A letter came for me, not from Peterson, not from any bank, hand-delivered by a young woman I'd seen only once at the post office. She seemed nervous, as if carrying contraband. She handed me the envelope with two hands, eyes darting away. Inside was a photograph I hadn't seen in the cottage. Thomas and Claudia on the deck of a small boat, the sea behind them, their hands clasped around a document. But there, tucked into the frame, was another face. My own, in the background, younger, laughing at something only I remembered. It was a memory folded into betrayal. On the back were two words, "Not all debts are financial." I pressed the paper to my chest and remembered the line from Thomas's unsent letter. Claudia wasn't who she said she was. Did that mean Claudia had a grudge? Or a score? Had she made of Thomas some transaction because she needed something he could give? Land, influence, a name? Or had he owed something deeper that neither of us had understood? The arrival of that photograph sent me deeper into the crawlspace of the past. I started visiting the old harbor where Thomas once docked his small rowboat. The men there talked freely because they thought I was harmless. They told me about a project, years back, about land purchases cleverly disguised as renovation efforts on a stretch of neglected coastline. "A hidden cove," one man said, laughing into his beer. "Said it would be a retreat. Said it would be private." "Who else knew?" I asked. "Never saw the missus much," another shrugged. But Andrew's name did come up. And this Claudia, she had a voice like a bell. Folks listened. Everything that had been a shadow was beginning to take a shape, jagged and human. Claudia wasn't merely a shadow lover or a business interest. She was a force, a woman with designs. Her letters had the tone of someone used to directing fate. I felt suddenly that she had been using Thomas as much as Andrew had used her. A triangle of hunger. Back at home, I set out the ledger across the dining table and started making lists. Names, dates, transfers, properties. A column for motives. A column for opportunity. I drew lines between the names, like an investigator in some crime drama. My handwriting looked ridiculous in the middle of that method. Small, neat, a housewife script turned into a map of strategy. It was the only map I would have then. The weeks that followed were a choreography of small moves, calls to discreet contacts, late-night drives to the city to meet Mr. Peterson and slide a document under his nose, a visit to the bank in a rainstorm that coincided with an internal audit. Each move was calculated to make the thieves, Andrew and Claudia, feel both safe and slightly uneasy, like mice in a house where someone else had the light on. And while the legal wheels turned, a different storm gathered. My letters, my anonymous tip, and the bank's slow alarms forced Andrew to make a choice. He stopped leaving town as often. Clara's messages went from absent to pleading. There were nights when I would sit alone on the porch and listen for his car, the sound of his soft threats in the yard as he plotted, the clink of a glass he drank from when he thought no one watched. Then one evening, as the dusk bled into an ink sky, I opened my door to find Clara standing there, wet hair, mascara like the ink of a faded map. She looked older, cornered. Behind her, in the dim light, Andrew's shadow moved like a question. "Mom," she said, voice frayed. "We need to talk." She stepped in as if into a sanctuary, and for the first time since the call that started the fire of everything, she sat without pretense. We didn't speak of sales or bank transfers. We spoke of childhood, of the lake, of the way Thomas used to build little boats from bark for her. She cried, not bitterly, but as if she had been carrying stones and finally set them down. "Andrew lied," she said. I believed him because I wanted to help. I thought I was saving us. I swear I didn't know the whole story. I didn't know he'd use our names like that." Her hands shook as she touched an old photograph on the mantel, the one with Thomas and her on his lap. I wanted to wrap her in my arms and tell her everything would be all right. But there is no comfort that undoes complicity. There is only the long, slow work of rebuilding trust. "I'm going to give you a chance," I told her then. "You can stand with me, or you can step back into the life you chose. But know this, when you stand with me, you stand where your father stood, and where he failed to protect you. That will not happen again." She nodded, half hope, half fear. "Mom." As she left that night, her silhouette swallowed by the fog, I felt a small, stubborn bloom of something like relief. We had a fragile truce. I had a thread of her loyalty. But I also had the knowledge that Claudia was not just a spectre in the letters. She was active, powerful, and patient. The storm was approaching, and I had lit a single lamp in the middle of the field. Now I had to wait for the mice to come out into the light. The law would do its slow work. Gossip would do its social work. My part was the rest, to pull a string so taut that, when it snapped, everything tangled in the same web they had tried to weave around us. That web, I promised myself as I watched the rain begin to fall against my window, would reveal not just theft and deceit, but the deeper debts that had been kept in the dark for too long. When someone hides behind a name and a shell company, they assume no one notices the hollow. But hollows make echoes. Echoes that, if you listen long enough, tell you the truth. And I had finally learned how to listen. The first autumn rain had started that morning. Soft, unhurried drops tapping against the window panes as though reminding the world that nothing lasts forever. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee in my hands, staring at the street below. The maple trees were already losing their color, the leaves falling like fading memories. It had been almost 2 months since Clara and Andrew had left for Europe. 2 months since the phone call that turned my heart into stone. And in those 2 months, everything had changed, though they didn't know it yet. Mr. Peterson, my lawyer, had completed what I asked. Quietly, efficiently, he had transferred all ownerships back under my name. The lake house, the apartment building, the investments Thomas had left behind, everything was mine again. Not that I cared about the money. What I wanted was clarity, justice, balance. For years, I had been the woman who smiled through pain, who forgave before being asked, who believed love could fix everything. But grief changes people. Betrayal transforms them. That morning, as I folded the papers Mr. Peterson had sent me, I realized something strange. I no longer felt anger. Just a stillness, a quiet acceptance that sometimes, to find peace, you have to let the truth burn through everything. The phone rang, an old landline I had almost forgotten about. I picked it up, expecting Mr. Peterson's calm voice. But instead, I heard something else. "Mom." It was Clara. For a moment, I said nothing. I had imagined this call so many times, what I'd say, what I'd feel, but now that it came, the words hid behind my ribs. "Clara," I said finally. "You sound tired." There was a soft laugh on the other end, but it was brittle, like glass ready to shatter. "I suppose I am. We're back." Back. So soon. Yes. Things didn't go as planned. A pause. Then her voice lowered, almost breaking. "Andrew. He's in trouble, Mom." Of course he was. I'd been expecting it. But I let my tone stay calm, gentle, the way mothers are supposed to sound. "What kind of trouble?" "Business. The investment failed. He borrowed money, thinking he could double it. Now, people are threatening him. We've lost everything. We have nowhere to go." The silence stretched between us. I could almost hear her breathing, the fear in it. And then she whispered the words I had waited to hear, though I'd never admit it. Mom, can we come home? Home. The irony nearly made me laugh. The same home she had stripped away from me without a second thought. But instead I said softly, "Of course, Clara. Come home." When I hung up, I felt no victory. Just a quiet ache, a reminder that even justice can hurt when it comes from someone you love. By sunset, I saw their cab pull up in front of the house. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of wet soil and regret. Clara stepped out first, wrapped in a long beige coat. Her face looked older, or maybe it was just the weight of consequences. Andrew followed, carrying 2 worn suitcases, his once proud posture bent. "Mom," Clara said, her eyes already glistening. "You look different." "I suppose I am," I replied. Inside, the warmth of the house seemed to swallow them whole. Clara looked around, as though seeing the place for the first time. The photos on the wall, the armchair Thomas used to sit in, the flowers on the table. "It smells the same," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "Some things don't change, even when people do." Andrew cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mrs. Grace, I just want to say." I raised a hand. "Don't. We'll talk later." Dinner was quiet. The only sounds were the clinking of forks and the ticking clock. Clara barely touched her food. Andrew kept glancing toward the window, like a man waiting for bad news to arrive. After the dishes were cleared, Clara followed me into the living room. "Mom, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. I was stupid. I thought Andrew knew what he was doing. He promised." I turned to face her. "You sold the lake house without even asking me, Clara." Tears welled in her eyes. "I know. I was desperate. I thought I was doing the right thing. You seemed so lost after Dad died. I didn't want you to worry about money. By taking everything that was mine." Her voice broke. "Please, Mom, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I see that now. I didn't know how to handle losing him. You had your grief, and I had mine. I thought if I could build something new, it would make the pain go away." I stared at her, really looked at her. Beneath the guilt and exhaustion, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who used to curl up beside me during thunderstorms, who once said she'd never leave me. Grief does strange things to people. It turns love into fear, and fear into greed. I sighed and said quietly, "You and Andrew can stay here for a while. But there are rules." Her head shot up, surprised. "Rules?" "Yes. No discussions about money. No lies. No deals behind my back. If you want a fresh start, it begins with honesty." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I promise." For a few days, the house returned to something that almost felt normal. Clara helped in the kitchen. Andrew spent his days making phone calls, trying to untangle his failed ventures. I kept my distance, watching, waiting. Then, one afternoon, as I was tending the garden, I saw a black car parked across the street. 2 men sat inside, watching the house. They weren't from the bank. I could tell by their posture. Too still, too deliberate. That evening, Andrew didn't come to dinner. I found him in the study, pacing nervously. When he saw me, he froze. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "No," he said too quickly. "Just work." I smiled faintly. "Strange. I didn't know you still had any." He flinched. Then I walked to the window and looked out. The car was gone. "Who were they, Andrew?" He turned pale. "No one. Just some investors. Investors don't sit outside people's homes in the rain." He didn't answer. His silence told me enough. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen, the documents Thomas had left me spread across the table. I had everything, every deed, every share, every legal right to the world Clara and Andrew once thought they owned. But revenge, I realized, wasn't about taking things back. It was about making people see what they had thrown away. The next morning, I called Mr. Peterson. "It's time," I said simply. "Time for what, Mrs. Grace?" "To make everything official." By noon, the notices had been delivered. Quiet, sealed envelopes to every property tied to Andrew's failed businesses. Within days, the banks would come for what he didn't own. The house they lived in before Europe, the cars, the accounts, all gone. That evening, Clara burst into the kitchen, tears in her eyes. "Mom, They're saying we don't own the apartment anymore. That it was never ours to begin with. I met her gaze calmly. That's true. She blinked. What do you mean? It belonged to your father. He put it in a company under my name years ago. You lived there as tenants, not owners. Her voice cracked. Mom, why didn't you tell me? I looked at her, my expression unreadable. Because you never asked. For a long time, she just stood there, silent. And then softly she whispered, What do we do now? I put down my cup, looked her straight in the eyes and said, We start over. This time with truth. Outside, the rain began again. Slow, steady, cleansing. And as I watched it fall, I realized that sometimes life doesn't give you perfect justice. It gives you reflection, a mirror to see who you've become. Clara had taken everything from me once. But in losing it all, she was finally learning what I had known all along, that love built on lies never survives. And that was a lesson no amount of money could buy. The morning began quietly. Too quietly. The air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I woke before dawn, unable to sleep, and wandered through the house that had witnessed everything. Love, betrayal, loss, and now, the fragile beginnings of peace. Clara's room door was half open. She was asleep, her face calm, the exhaustion of the last few days softening her sharpness. For the first time in years, she looked like my daughter again, not the stranger molded by Andrew's ambitions. Downstairs, the table still held the unopened letter I had found among Thomas's old files. I'd kept it hidden for weeks, afraid of what it might reveal. The handwriting was unmistakably his, neat, precise, every word deliberate. The envelope was marked only with one word, for Eleanor when it's time. I had avoided opening it because time was never clear. But now, after everything, I felt it had come. I broke the seal. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I know you'll search for reasons, for someone to blame. Please don't. The truth is, I made mistakes. The business wasn't as clean as I told you. Andrew was involved. Yes, the same young man who seemed to adore our daughter. He saw an opportunity when I was weak. I let him in. When I realized what he had done, how much he'd risked in my name, it was too late. If anything happens, remember this. Protect Clara. She's innocent. She only believed what she was told. Promise me you won't let bitterness take what's left of your heart. I loved you more than I ever said. Thomas. My hands trembled as I finished reading. The words blurred. It felt like hearing his voice one last time, wrapped in regret and love. He had tried to protect me, even in his final breath. And somehow, he had protected Clara too, by asking me to let go. But how do you let go of betrayal that cut through bone? How do you forgive the people who watched your world collapse and called it justice? That afternoon, I stood at the kitchen window, watching the storm clouds gather. Clara entered quietly. Her eyes were swollen, her hands fidgeting with her sleeves. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile. Mom, she began. Andrew's gone. I turned slowly. Gone. He left this morning. He said he couldn't face the police or the debt collectors. He just left me. Her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Betrayal had a strange symmetry. It always returned to its source. Clara sank into the chair opposite me. I don't know what to do anymore, she whispered. I thought he loved me. I looked at her, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. So did I. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was cleansing, like rain washing over the ruins. Finally, I handed her Thomas's letter. Read this. As her eyes scanned the words, I saw the realization dawn. The truth she had never known, the weight her father had carried, the manipulation she had fallen into. Tears fell silently down her cheeks. Mom, she choked. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I believe you, I said quietly. She blinked. You do. Yes. Because love makes fools of us all. It made me blind, it made your father weak, and it made you trust the wrong man. But it's over now. For a long moment, we simply sat there, the rain drumming against the windows like an old lullaby. Then I said, "Clara, I'm leaving this house." Her head snapped up. "What? Why?" "Because this place has too many ghosts. I've lived surrounded by memories, waiting for apologies that would never come. But I don't need them anymore." She looked lost. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere quiet. Maybe by the sea. I haven't decided yet. I just know I want peace." Her voice trembled. "And me?" I smiled gently. "You'll stay. You'll rebuild what's yours. Honestly this time. I've signed the papers. The apartment building will go to you. But not because I owe you. Because I want you to learn how to keep something without breaking it." Clara covered her mouth with her hands, sobbing. "Mom, I don't deserve this." "None of us do," I said softly. "That's why it's forgiveness, not reward." I stood and walked toward the window. The rain had stopped. A pale light broke through the clouds, painting the garden in gold. "When your father died," I said quietly, "I thought the world had ended. But maybe it was just beginning. For both of us. We had to lose everything to see what was real." Clara came closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Can you ever forgive me?" I turned and met her eyes, the same blue-gray as Thomas's. "I already have." And for the first time in years, I meant it. That night, after she had gone to bed, I walked through the house one last time, touching the walls, the photographs, the small remnants of a life that once felt unbreakable. On the mantel was a single framed photo of Thomas and me from our wedding day. I picked it up, smiled sadly, and whispered, "You were right, love. It was time." The next morning, before dawn, I packed a small bag and left a note on the table for Clara. "My dear Clara, don't look for me. I need time to breathe, to remember who I was before the pain. The world is yours now. Treat it kindly. Love. Mom." As I stepped out into the cool air, the sky was streaked with soft pinks and grays. The world felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from the past. I was walking toward the future. And maybe that was the truest revenge of all, to heal in a world that tried to break me. Epilogue. Months later, a letter arrived at the seaside cottage where I now lived. It was from Clara. Inside was a photograph, her standing beside the newly restored lake house, the garden in bloom again. On the back, she had written only 5 words. "I'm keeping it safe now." I smiled, folded the photo, and placed it beside Thomas's letter in my drawer. Outside, the waves crashed softly against the shore. For once, there was peace.